Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Would you please take your seats so that we can get this session started and try and run the afternoon as per program. So when you're ready, and you nearly are, I want to begin the afternoon by introducing our very distinguished speaker. He's described in the CV notes in the program as a serial entrepreneur. And if you then read the following, 12, 14 lines, it may have the same effect as it had on me, which leaves me feeling a serial underachiever. He's co-founder of Amadeus Capital Partners and chair of the high-level group on the European Innovation Council. And that's why he's here and is going to talk to us for, I hope, a maximum of 15 minutes on the European Innovation Council, which is, as you know, a new kid on the block and regarded as a very important new feature of European innovation policy. So, Herman, please, the platform is yours.
Well, thank you for these kind remarks. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I know I've got a serious problem here to keep you awake after lunch, so I will try and entertain you with a few slides here if we can put them up. And here they are. So it's about innovation in Europe. And it's about evolution versus design. This is the slide set that I pinched from another one of my talks on intelligent machines, where I compare the biological intelligent machines from the artificial intelligent machines, which is all the rage now, of course. And we have an opportunity to do better than evolution and design how we're going to do innovation in Europe during the next stage of our development. I have a small number of slides touching on the following subjects. On the status of European universities, which is actually quite good. On technology translation, which is not so good. On startups, which is very good. We actually produce more startups than the US. On scale-ups, which is terrible. And then on the situation of venture capital and corporate venturing, which is also terrible. However, we're going to solve all these problems with the European Innovation Council. So, let's start with the state of our universities. Well, we can be proud of our universities. In the latest bit of research that the Times Educational Supplement does every year, out of the top 1,000 universities in the world, we've got 40% of them, more than any other region in the world, I think, on a par, if not better, than the United States. We've also undergone a remarkable cultural shift at our universities, and I think this is not to be underestimated, because I've been doing this for over 30 years now, and when I first suggested to my dear Cambridge professor colleagues that we should start a company and maybe do something with this brilliant bit of research that they've done, the reaction that I got is, how dare you suggest that I sully my pure academic hands and do this pact with Mammon? This has all but disappeared. People are now, there's this big cultural change that people at universities now are very supportive of spin-out startups trying to make something of our research for the improvement of the UK and Europe. So this entrepreneurial spirit is growing at really quite a clip. I was really quite surprised to find that our entrepreneurship society at Cambridge University now is the largest student society, ahead of rowing. So this is great improvement. We also now have startup support at most of our European universities. This is being taken very seriously. We have technology transfer offices, we have mentoring, we've got business angel communities. So this ecosystem is gradually coming together. And it is also very important to distinguish between two types of innovations. There is the evolutionary breakthroughs, and if these breakthroughs are evolutionary in nature, then large companies are quite capable of absorbing them and improving their jet engines or their cars or whatever, because it fits into the way they think about the world. Sadly, the same is not true for revolutionary breakthroughs at our universities. Large companies are actually quite bad at dealing with revolutionary breakthroughs, and this is much better done in startups, and it's very important that the large companies participate in these small companies that, of course, often fail, and often they get it wrong. They get overexcited about a new idea that actually doesn't work. But large companies need to engage in them, and the right way to engage is through corporate venturing. Because one of the problems with large companies is if they like a small company, they often love it to death, and that's not very healthy either. You know, you want to keep these small companies to be separate, to do their own thing, and create these amazing breakthroughs that sometimes they do. Now we come to technology transfer offices. Now, I'm just doing a bit of research to work on a best practice paper for British universities together with Steve Caddick at the Wellcome Trust. And so far we have the buy-in from the Royal Society. I'm very proud to be the only venture capitalist in the world who's also an FRS. The Royal Academy of Engineering, the Royal Academy of Medicine, and the Wellcome Trust. So I hope when we finally produce this best practice paper, some people, at least in Britain, will listen to that. What it will say is it is based on two basic principles that we've all agreed, talking to all the top universities in Britain, on how to do technology transfer. The first problem that we're trying to solve is the problem of IP. There is a tremendous amount of discussion on how we should deal with IP, tremendous amount of bad blood that gets created by these long negotiations on IP. And our proposal will be something along the lines of the top US universities and some British universities already, like Imperial, where it's a formula. It's not a negotiation, it's a formula. And the formula is 5% of your company for all the IP that you can eat, up to £2 million into the company. Now, the reason why we're so keen to make this formulaic, and it's only roughly right, you'll never get this perfectly right. And of course, there need to be exceptions for, spectacular breakthroughs. But on average, 5% seems to be as good a number as any. The much more important thing is that it is a formula, and therefore the thing can be signed now, not tomorrow, not next week, not in a month's time, not in a year's time, not in 2 years' time. Believe it or not, some of these IP negotiations go on for 2 years, and this has been one of the aggravations, of course, that we found when we did our research. And 2 years later, it might be too late for the startup to make any impact on the market at all. So the fact that it is simple, everybody understands it, and it can be done now is very important on the IP. Second principle, unbundling. When we talk to these TTOs, they say, well, 5% for the IP might be all right, but look, for all the hard work that we're doing for these companies, we're mentoring them, we're supporting them, that's why we need 60% of the, in egregious cases, 60% of the company. And we say, well, fair enough. If you're really working so hard for these companies and you're doing this spectacularly impressive work for the companies, then do it in competition with other people who might want to do it. So get your extra 10, 50% if you want to, but against the competition of the local business community, the local VC community. So if there is a business angel who's willing to do it for 5% rather than 50%, then the normal market forces are in place, and there is a bit of a check and balances, and will disallow the abuse of the monopoly on the IP to throw other services down the poor entrepreneur's throat, as does happen occasionally. In general, it must be said that TTOs actually do a respectable job, but they're all over the place. There is no best practice, and this is what we're trying to work on, of course, with agreement, together with all these TTOs, at least in the Russell Group companies in the UK, but I hope that this could also then act as a template for TTOs all across Europe. So I've already made the point about revolutionary ideas should go into startups, and evolutionary ideas should be licensed to large companies. Scale-ups. This is our number one problem. We do not have a startup problem. We produce more startups than in the United States, but they don't grow. We've got a scale-up problem. And the solution to the scale-up problem, and of course the intrinsic problem that we won't solve overnight, is the fact that the amount of venture capital per GDP in Europe is a fifth of the amount of venture capital in the United States. So we've got a problem there. The other problem, which is improving enormously, is the availability of good managers. And that's really been holding us back for a very long time, but this ecosystem has grown to such an extent that I'm able to tell you the following interesting statistic of our own fund, Amadeus Capital Partners. We did 17% of our deals with serial entrepreneurs when we started with Amadeus One almost 20 years ago now. This has risen to 70 of our deals we now do with serial entrepreneurs. Not that we prefer serial entrepreneurs, it's just that they are available to such an extent that there are now many more people doing it the second, third, fourth time compared with 20 years ago. So there are two factors which have improved dramatically. One is we've grown our own entrepreneurial and management talent in Europe, so there's a whole undergrowth of these capable of people now. But the second reason is that we have managed to grow a number of billion-dollar companies, or unicorns as they're called now, in Europe, so we can now attract talent from all over the world. They don't have to believe that they are the first people in the world to produce a unicorn in Europe. In Cambridge, we didn't have a single unicorn 20 years ago. We now have 15, only 6 of which had anything to do with me. But they now exist, and we can attract the management talent also from Silicon Valley. One of my great success stories, Solexa, which is now Illumina. It's a $30 billion company that was created by a person that we managed to get back from Silicon Valley who ran a $1 billion division of ABI, and we told John West that we had bad news and we had good news. And he ran a $1 billion division which had 90% of the gene sequencing in the world. And we said, the bad news is we're going to blow you out of the water with our instrument because it's so much better than anything that you've ever seen or sold. And the good news is we want you to do it. So he said, okay, what is it? He came to Cambridge, looked at our technology, which was the sequencing by synthesis technology of Solexa. Being an MIT graduate, he had the brains to realize that that really was a revolution. And he did it. And it's now responsible for 90% of the gene sequencing in the world. We also need larger growth funds. We need to be able to back those of the many startups that we produce in Europe that are ready for big time with a 50 million euro check and not a 5 million euro check. And I'm working on helping with this to bring some of the bigger growth funds into Europe. Importantly, as you see, we do have a VC problem in terms of the amount of venture capital, but the EU is helping. There is now a 400 million euro fund of funds, which helps trigger the market to actually multiply that by a factor of 4. So we will get a number of funds totaling around 1.6 billion because of that European initiative that was put together by Carlos Moedas. Very pleasingly, corporate venture capital is growing in Europe at quite a pace. We've got Bosch, we've got Siemens, we've got a number of French companies. And it's corporate venture capital of quite a different nature to the corporate venture capital which we had around the year 2000, when all the corporates felt that they now needed to engage with small companies but didn't have a clue how to do it. 18 years later, they have learned a lot on what to do, what not to do, that this is a way of getting a window on technologies and an ability to place lots of bets, lots of small bets, and watch what happens. And then if there is one that works particularly well, they can always get closer and eventually even buy them if they feel that this fits into their strategy particularly well. Probably the most important event, though, is after decades of lagging behind the US in the venture returns, the latest venture capital returns in Europe are now on a par with the venture capital returns in the US, and that's what finally makes the market excited and makes the money flow into Europe as well. So let me finish with just a few remarks on the European Innovation Council. We've seen that universities in Europe actually do quite well. We've also seen one of the most successful European initiatives with the European Research Council. Now, why has the European Research Council become such a phenomenal success? It is very simple at the end of the day: excellence. It had that one criteria of supporting excellence. This meant that even humble universities like Cambridge University will now tell you how many ERC grants they have as a sign, as a measure of the quality of the university that you're in. So it's now an accepted quality standard all across Europe. And if somebody in Romania gets an ERC grant, everybody else in Europe knows he competed with the best universities in Europe. This guy must be really good. We listen to his research. We will work with this guy. We want to apply the same discipline of excellence to the European Innovation Council. Again, we want to make it single company, single country, excellence only. How did the ERC achieve that? Well, I talked at great lengths to people who built up the ERC, in particular Helga Novotny as well, who is a fellow Austrian. And she said, finally, it was the ERC board personally getting on the phone, convincing the opinion leaders in academia to become evaluators, to become part of the evaluation process of ERC, so that people really knew that if there was an ERC grant, it was really world-class. This is what we have to do with the EIC. We've got to go to the key opinion leaders in each of our technology clusters, be they Berlin, be it Paris, be it Stockholm, Helsinki, or London. Go to the opinion leaders convince them to join in this pan-European effort to pick the best innovations out of our universities and make them work for Europe PLC. We have a pilot running now. It's not a small pilot. It's 700 million, I think, this year. The proposal is that the EIC will be a key part of Horizon Europe, which is the name of the follow-on framework program to the Horizon 2020, which will start in 2021 and run for 7 years. And we're all looking forward to this Thursday to see what the decision will be, but we hope it will be a positive one. And it will have a blended way of providing finance. So two of the objectives that we've set ourselves at the EIC is, number one, to simplify things for our companies in Europe. Some companies are bewildered by the breadth of support projects that we have at the EU. We want to simplify this and just have one port of call, at least for EU applications. The second thing we want to do is provide a blended set of financial tools, starting with grants via guaranteed loans, all the way to equity. It is important to point out that the equity part will only be a small equity part and in no way is trying to compete with the marketplace. On the contrary, it is very much has to be seen as a nucleation effort to help build the syndicate for these companies, because venture capital works best if there is a like-minded syndicate supporting the companies, of course, not just in Europe, but expanding their reach all across the world. We've written a report that is available to all of you. It's called the European Innovation Council report. We've made 14 detailed recommendations on how we're going to do this, how we're going to implement this basic idea of excellence and a blended finance in these 14 recommendations. And it's all about accelerating breakthrough innovation through funding, awareness, scale, and talent. It's a very nice acronym called FAST, and you can look that up on the web. So in conclusion, I made a few remarks on the quality of your European universities, which is high, technology translation, which really needs improving, startups, of which we've got enough, scale-ups, of which we've not got enough, and then the improvements both in the ecosystem of venture capital, corporate venturing, and we hope that the European Innovation Council can become the hub to help this team sport, because a team sport it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're very welcome, but time is of the essence. Good afternoon again. My name is John Wiles. This session is going to be a bit pinched for time, so I'm going to say very little beyond the fact that, that in the preparation I made for this panel, I had not realized until hearing Hermann Hauser that actually that there is a tide flowing in the direction of achievement and environment for growing ideas, and that the, if you like, the EIC is conceived perhaps in such a way as to take advantage of that tide and carry us to some success. So we have on the panel here 4 distinguished people who bring to this discussion a variety of experience and perception about startups and making a success of innovation and innovation technologies. So they are Richard Buckley of AstraZeneca, immediately on my left. He's the global head of global corporate affairs for AstraZeneca. Paolo Cerrone is a chemist, professor at the Department of Chemistry in University of Bologna. Pekki Soini is the Director General of Business Finland, which seems to be very well represented here today. Actually, I heard a very interesting discussion on AI. And Daria Tataj, who is chair of the high-level advisory group to Commissioner Moedas. If you can actually perhaps keep your remarks to even briefer than I suggested you. But Richard, please begin.
Sure. Maybe I'll just hit the headlines.
Hit the headlines.
That's fine. So again, I'm Rich Buckley. I work for a little startup company called AstraZeneca, an Anglo-Swedish life sciences company, 60,000 people worldwide. And our mission is to push the boundaries of science to deliver innovative new medicines to the millions of patients and families that need them. Am I not on? That's fine. So, is that better? So our mission at AstraZeneca is to push the boundaries of science to deliver innovative new medicines to the millions of patients and families who need them. We do that by investing nearly $6 billion a year in research and development, billion with a B, primarily in areas of oncology, respiratory disease, cardiovascular, renal, metabolic, opportunistic research in neuroscience and autoimmune disease and infection. When I have the opportunity to speak with policymakers or to journalists or groups like this, I find we're often talking about three interlocking gears of issues. The first being, we truly are in a golden age of science. And I want to expand on that. I'll leave the proof points for later, but I think you heard Mr. Hauser refer to some of them. Mapping the human genome was once revolutionary and radical and is now almost routine. Many of our colleagues are at ASCO this week. The headlines coming out of the Oncology Summit in Chicago are also jaw-dropping. And even within our own portfolio, we're talking about cures for certain types of cancers, cures for certain types of respiratory disease, disease-modifying solutions in cardiovascular and renal. So a golden age of science would be thing one. Thing two would be also massive global unmet medical need. NCDs killing 40 million people a year, and even in Africa, the public health crisis has gone from infectious disease to NCDs. So golden age of science coupled with massive unmet medical need. And of course, the third gear would be payers, both public and private around the world, figuring out how to pay for it. And in each of these three megatrends, if you will, public policy really matters. How do you feed out the line to ensure that we continue to have innovative industries, but then how do we pay for it? Who are the right patients at the right time? How do we ensure patients that are demanding access get access? I think there's a fourth issue, and it's playing out in Boston right now, which is the biotechnology conference, which this year happens to be in Boston. It's 25 or 30,000 people. It's a trade show. It's celebrating biotechnology and life sciences worldwide. And I was talking with a colleague this morning saying, it's not just biotechnology that we're celebrating, but all the adjacent industries. So there'll be one whole row of companies that do nothing but IT for phase 3 clinical trials. And you turn the corner, there's another 20 companies that are doing pharmacovigilance or whatever. So if you want to understand the power of this industry as an economic engine, just stand in the middle of the room at the biotechnology conference. And you will also see booths and tables from every town, city, state, municipality, province, country around the world that wants to attract high-tech, high-paying jobs and the engine that this industry brings. And the questions that we ask when we're going around and speed dating with all these different places, thinking about where to invest, is number one, what is the strength of your intellectual property? Is absolutely the first question that is ever asked. Second would be, what is the consistency and transparency and rationality of your regulatory regimes, your tax regimes? What is your market to reward the innovation that comes out the other side? Often there's a great desire to attract this industry, not always the desire to pay for the innovation that pops out the other end of the funnel. And I guess the fifth would be access to smart people and access to communities and ecosystems of smart people that fill our talent pipeline. And in each of those areas, again, public policy really matters a lot. I know there's been conversation this week about the SPC waiver. And so for us, the question is not just on the merits of the SPC waiver, which we see as an erosion of intellectual property rights, but also what is the signal, what is the message that Europe is sending about the strength of intellectual property for biotechnology and for life sciences. We would rather policymakers that are thinking about containing cost or managing cost think about moving from volume and price to value. So 80% of the products in our pipeline have some kind of personalized medicine component, some kind of diagnostic. Every company in our industry has some kind of right patient, right product, right outcome sort of strategy. And so moving to a world where we're engaging with payers up front to say, we think this product will work in these patients with these measurable outcomes, and only then do we get reimbursed accordingly, we think is really the next wave. So I'll end there, but I'll just say once again, public policy really matters in all of these important issues.
You're a star. Thank you very much. Kept within time brilliantly. I'd like to move on to Paula, who is actually, in addition to being a professor, is working on and in a startup, something to do with silicon. Tell us a bit about your experience and whether the winds blowing behind you will blow you towards building a bigger company.
We will see the future. Is it working or not?
Okay.
So my personal experience on innovation, a personal view from academia. It's fine. Oh, now it's fine. So I got an ERC starting grant that allowed me to innovate my research. Why that? It's a matter of money. If you don't have enough money, you will look for like incremental research. You don't want to risk anything, otherwise you will not publish anything. Having money, I could explore something that was completely new for me, the silicon nanocrystal world. And at the beginning it was tough, like 1 year in which we couldn't get any result. But a lot of people working on that, thanks again to the money coming from ERC. And finally we got results together with a collaboration with a US partner. And so this is innovation and research, but then it was like serendipity discovered because my grant was intended to use the silicon nanocrystal for photovoltaic application. But because of different reasons, we decided not to go for this and to look at silicon nanocrystals for bioimaging. So sometimes you do an experiment to look for, in my case, photovoltaic application, and the results are not good, but you can look that you can find something more interesting in a different field. So based on that, also I start looking at entrepreneurial activity. So I applied for a proof of concept grant and I got it. And this was really unexpected when I started the ERC starting grant. So now we are in the process of optimization, looking for a startup. We are still at the beginning of the process. But I think that this was very important from my point of view because of a cultural shift, just looking to academia and research or starting looking also outside of that. And also because of this collaboration with US partner, you can really see the difference, at least between Italy, where I come from, and US. And we are really, I mean, in Italy, the educational system is not so bad, but technology transfer is really lacking, also lack of investment. So this was very important, also the collaboration. And so it was supported by European Commission. And what next? On my side, I will look for optimizing the system, but what should I wait for? I mean, look for from the European Commission. From my point of view, this ERC was very important because you do not have strict rules and you do not spend much time in writing financial and scientific report that in other cases of European funding is really too much from my point of view. So having not strict rules, and for example, as I told you, the first stuff was about photovoltaic, but then I can change to a different application. So serendipity was very important, and also not spending too much time in this reporting activity.
Thank you. So, I mean, your enterprise, your adventure, your journey, you think, is certainly easier than it would have been, what, 5 years ago? Thanks to European policy.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. For two reasons, both money and this cultural shift. I would never have thought about that without this grant opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you. Becky, Finland is throwing everything at AI, as far as I can gather from the session I sat in this morning. But we're interested in hearing, actually, the what Finland, if you like, what Finnish policy is bringing to this process of growing ideas.
All right. Does it work now? All right, this works. Right, yeah, Business Finland, this is an organization, what is the combination of innovation agency, Invest in Finland, export kind of promotion and help, and also Visit Finland activity. So this is the novelty on combining different actions. And issue there is that innovation nowadays is not only kind of that we figure out that it is a linear process, that the first someone invents something and then it thinks the customer and then exports it, but it is a combination of issues, and customer has to brought in front and close to the innovator very fast, because innovation means business. So it is a business creation, business development. And therefore also innovation agencies, funding agencies have to kind of work differently. Like we have been doing for some years already, is that we are looking at the company and the team first. And do they have kind of ambition to grow? And do they have a kind of the team what can get it started? If they have if they are lacking skills, maybe we fund that kind of skill development first, even before rushing into R&D project. So that means that you have to think and push things differently, and having also different means of helping companies than just innovation funding. But so that is one important issue. Then we have different kind of programs for startups. Our annual innovation funding volume is over 500 million euros. For startups, we put annually 140 million, and we have different kind of programs there. The Crème de la Crème program is Young Innovative Company program, where we are really pushing companies as far as possible in the international markets. But there, our problem is scale up, of course, still also in Finland. Even with our private investments and VC kind of field is improving, but this scale up funding, what is very often, over 10 million per company in one round, so that kind of VCs we don't have. So therefore, Europe is definitely kicking in very, very importantly, and we are also definitely looking forward to this EIC development, and how we, as national agencies, can help in the process. We have seen also with this SME instrument, what has been very good, that those companies who have been successful in Finland in that area, they have been very good. So they have gone through these different gates in our national funding, and therefore this collaboration hopefully will continue with this EIC when going forward. And scaling even faster companies to international markets. When there is a kind of the internet or digital type of innovation or AI type of innovations, then the time is money. You have to be very fast.
That's, as indeed you were. Thank you. Finland, as I understand it, Finland has been feeling, as it were, or worrying about losing its relative position in the European economy and in the development of technology. Is that a fair judgment or not?
Well, not really. You know that there was a big change in Finland when Nokia company stopped handset business. But then what happened was that all these ICT specialists, they went around of different industries in Finland and creating their own companies and different kind of companies. So that means that our capability now develop and grow ICT-based innovations or multidisciplinary innovations is very good. So we have very big field of promising companies and we have a good deal flow in that sense and good, well, breakthroughs. This, as we talked about unicorns, so we have one decacorn, what is Supercell. So that was one of the good example of the companies. What was funded by us, very early stage. Nobody else touched that company, and the founder of the company says that without that time Tekes, the company wouldn't exist. So. That is, of course, we need these unicorns and decacorns, but kind of the main important, most important issue is that you are in the right package in the right moment with the company.
Thank you. I mean, it's fascinating that the seeds of your current state of development now came out of a Nokia collapse. I didn't realize that. It's very interesting. Daria, over to you. You tell us, as chairman of the high-level group of advisors to Commissioner Moedas, you want to tell us what Europe is doing, is that right?
Yeah, I wanted to tell a story about Europe in the making. But before we start, let me say that I was very impressed with the way you presented your achievement. And I wish that my startup company in 20 years' time will also be at this level. I am part of a generation that knows what it means to scale up things. Poland, 30 years ago, was one of the poorest countries in Europe. Today, it's one of the most successful countries in the world. And the recent World Bank report, Lessons from Poland, Insights for Poland, says that actually we are second to South Korea in terms of speed with which we have become a high-income country. And our social model is interesting because we managed to keep the Gini coefficient really low in the group of peer countries, which means that we have a high social cohesion. Not very rich and not very poor, but pretty coherent. And I'm saying this because I have 30 years of experience. Exactly 30 years ago, I got my first job. And I've been always involved and fascinated by the phenomenon of scaling up. Now, we are, you asked me about being a chairwoman of high-level advisors to Commissioner Moedas, and some of my colleagues are here. And indeed, our role and mandate is to flank Commissioner and his cabinet and help become a sounding board for ideas for new projects like the EIC. We have published in our last year book, The Thinking, what should EIC be to turn on to Europe on the next stage and turn the capacity into real growth and jobs. We've been working on entrepreneurial universities because we believe that while Europe has some of the top world universities in terms of number and quality, many of them need to understand that the disruptive times we are having, we need to prepare better the young generation for the future. We're also working on the mission-oriented policy. This is also in our recent report published a few weeks ago. And we are most recently working on an innovation divide. And I personally find this fascinating because while I see how much success my compatriots have had in Central and Eastern Europe, I also see how far we are from where the ambition for Europe is. And we do need champions. We do need to compete globally. So let me tell you a little story about a project that I've been involved with. I started a company a couple of years ago. We are a strategy and investment firm, and we help build innovation districts. I was approached a few months ago by the EIT alumni to fund startup days in Barcelona. I have moved to Barcelona a couple of months ago, and my friends, if I may say, I see them here. I'm very pleased. Thank you for coming. Now, Barcelona is a very special place because 30 years ago it was, a pretty deteriorated city. But because of the very rational long-term policy, what is known in the world as the 22@ Innovation District, today it's a role model for gentrification. How you can turn around the whole post-industrial area in a disruptive times when industry simply moves out to China and to Asia. And what do you do with the city that has a huge industrial tradition, amazing creative potential, but then not human capacity to turn this around? And when you look today at Barcelona, which has been named the innovation capital of Europe in 2014 and is the 4th city for startups, you believe that this is the place in Europe where it becomes a magnet for talent. And I'm part of this startup community, of this international startup community. So when the EIT alumni asked me to sponsor the startup days, I told them, well, but we work with mid-sized cities. We help mid-sized cities build innovation districts. Are you interested? They said, okay. I said, well, then we will give you a mission. And the mission was to reinvent Badalona. Now, what is Badalona? Who has heard what is Badalona? Okay, just a few people. Badalona is the 3rd largest city in Catalonia. And it forms part of a metropolitan area that once was called the Catalan Manchester and was indeed the 2nd most industrialized zone in the world. Then after struggling for decades, Barcelona made it. Barcelona is beautiful and affluent, but Badalona not. Badalona is one of those places, like dozens of others in Europe, that slowly become places that don't matter anymore. Troubles with immigration, with unemployment, with social exclusion. And we gave them a mission, and we know that we're trying to understand how to incubate those missions. So I was very excited that we can have a learning laboratory, a city as a living lab to understand. They came up with 5 projects. Number 1, build social innovation lab for 3D makerspace in the old Endesa plant, which is the famous 3 chimneys on the Barcelona skyline. Create a artificial intelligence lab. Create a bridge to China, a cultural center, because Badalona happens to be the largest cluster of Chinese companies in Spain, 600 firms. Create an artificial reef for surfers. They make a case that if you have surfing culture, then city goes up. And I would love that in our office, which is on the beach, our creative lab, we have our own private reef for surfing. And then create a prototype for a sustainable village, a village town. When you prototype new lifestyles, new commuting modes, new shared economy models, because Badalona is also 100 hectares of non-developed land at the coastline of Barcelona, the largest this piece of land in the. So I think this is an excellent business opportunity. And I was faced with 2 options. I thought, so the award for the alumni, EIT alumni, was an innovation retreat in our newly opened innovation lab on Badalona Beach. And I, of course, could coach them how to make a global career, how to grow your company to global markets, and so on. But I thought, what would happen if I took them seriously and tried to scale up the impact the EIT alumni can have on Europe? And actually, I went around Europe fundraising for commitment and fundraising for money to have this project, these 5 projects being funded. It's kind of unconventional, but actually there is so much money in Europe, there is so much funding in Europe, we are all so affluent and talented that if only we had a capacity to incubate better and faster good projects, we would be very much ahead where we want to be. Now, On June 21st, there will be a masterclass on how to transform mid-sized cities. You're very welcome to watch online with Professor Manuel Castells, who for the last 20 years has been #1 most quoted communication scholar in the world, and who has also created the template of the EIT and the model of the KICS. And I had the honor to be on the founding board of the EIT. And this is why I do care about the EIT alumni and the impact that they will make to Europe. So this is Europe in the making, mid-sized cities, innovation, and everybody has a power to go out there and make things happen.
Well, truly inspirational. Thank you very much, and very interesting. I mean, one of the messages that you've just delivered, and indeed I think Herman Hanse referred to, of course, is that actually money is less of a problem than it was. I mean, it's still a problem, but your statement that there's loads of money swishing around Europe is very encouraging indeed. But I just wanted to finish, Richard, if I could ask you, as it were, from the perspective of a very, very large multinational company. And from what you've heard here, are you encouraged, as it were, to believe that perhaps someday there will be a rival, a homegrown unicorn rival to AstraZeneca, or is Europe still just going to be bumping along, doing its best and not getting anywhere?
No, I think we're bullish on Europe.
Mm-hmm.
We're heavily invested here. A quarter to a third of our global revenues are still in Europe. That jaw-dropping science I was talking about is happening all over Europe and Sweden and the UK. So we're continuing to invest, and I didn't mean to give any impression otherwise, other than public policy matters, and whether it comes to taxes or rewarding innovation when it comes out the other pipeline, when it comes out of the pipeline, or protecting strong intellectual property, that over time water finds its own level, and it's a globally competitive sector now. But we believe in Europe, and we're here to stay. But we're also going to work with policymakers constructively in order to create an environment that's hospitable to that kind of innovation.
Excellent, thank you. Well, you've all been a moderator's dream. I mean, we've been working in a much narrower time frame than I expected, but you've actually kept the time, you've been succinct, you've been extremely interesting, and I invite everybody to join me in thanking the panelists for a very good performance. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, it was so compressed in there.
Turn on the mics, yes, right? This is working, I believe, okay? Again, I'm Richard Hudson, the editor of Science Business, so welcome back. And now I'd like to welcome someone whom you might call the consummate Brussels insider. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean, you have spent more than, this is Jean-Éric Paquet. He is the new Director General for Research and Innovation at the European Commission. And you have been in the Commission for more than 20 years.
Yep.
Before this, you were in the Deputy Secretary General of the Commission, which is the central the heart of the beast, as it were, the administrative heart of the beast. And before that, you were in DG Enlargement, working on the Balkans, in DG Transport on mobility, ambassador to Mauritania, I think. And there is a research connection. Did you begin? Was it in the cabinet of Philippe Bousquin?
Second part of the Prodi Commission.
Okay,
yeah.
So you are one of the many fathers and mothers of the European Research Council. Yeah, it's amazing how success has many fathers. So tell us a little bit more. So tell us a little bit more about yourself. I mean, you know, whenever there's a change in Director General, particularly after 7.5 years, there's fear and loathing throughout the entire community. Everybody asking, who is he? Who knows him?
Yeah.
So who are you?
Well, I mean, good afternoon, and thanks a lot for this opportunity to introduce myself and also start this conversation, which certainly will not end today. Well, I was labeled so the inside the ultimate insider.
Ultimate
you said?
insider. Yes.
Yeah, that's quite nice. I was also the seasoned bureaucrat. Was the other one a few weeks ago when I started. I mean, the seasoned you can see.
Cinnamon or
the bureaucrat you will have to judge over time. Well, I've been indeed in the Commission for, in fact, 25 years running this May. And you said it out. I've been doing several. I mean, I had several different positions in the Commission, rather different ones too, which is one of the, of course, remarkable features and attraction of working in an institution like the Commission. But I have been on a very regular basis in contact or in charge, in part, of the research and innovation portfolio. Not starting with Philippe Busquin in 2002. I mean, this was an absolutely amazing moment, which very much explains why I was so delighted when Carlos Moedas asked me to join him and take over DG Research and Innovation. But already before that, I started in transport. In the 90s, and transport policy at EU level, some of you might be familiar with it, is really deploying the entire toolbox of what is available for public policymakers at EU level, which is legislation, I mean, directives, regulation, but also investment, international relations, and at the time already a very solid research program with Jürgen Erdmann and Wim Blanc. And so I was in contact in my duties there with FP4 already. And I think we are now moving to FP9. Some of the features which were part of the program then still exist today. Many others have changed, developed, improved, not least, of course, the budgetary ambition, as you discussed it with Günther Oettinger this morning. I worked then with Philippe. I was his deputy head of cabinet, replacing Alan Sita. And I came when FP6 was really up and running. But I was then very much involved in preparing with Achilles Mitsos and the DG, and of course under the management of Daniel Jacob, so for Philippe, the multi-annual financial framework. So I was there where we are today in reality, preparing the Commission proposal. And maybe you remember that at that time, for the first time ever, we proposed to double the research budget. Which was a real strategic choice in the Commission, and the discussion we had at the time with commissioners, with the President, but also with the DG, is not that different from today. It is, how do you justify this very significant effort, budgetary effort at EU level? How do you justify the added value, the complementarity, the leveraging effect which you have from this EU budget? And secondly, and this is maybe slightly less visible yet, but it will come, is how do you do it? Because it's a very, very significant funding, and directly managed is a deep challenge. And for the DG at the time, this was moving from a program run in-house to setting up executive agencies. So that's also what started at the time, of which the most spectacular is, of course, the European Research Council, which had been promoted by the science community. We were told at the time for many, many years, and Philippe decided to take it up. So he's the father. I'm the obstetrician, or how you call that in English. At that early level, then there were many more.
Who is the midwife?
And there were many, many more than midwives. Kurt Vandenberger being one of them, as head of cabinet of the cabinet of Commissioner Potočnik afterwards. So science clearly is something which I have known in these early years of my careers. And then my last direct experience of it was again in transport, where I moved back after being head of delegation in Mauritania. And here I was research director in transport, in DG Move, working very closely with DG RTD, Andras Ziegler at the time. And from that 1.5 years of overseeing the research portfolio of DG Move, I retain one obvious finding, or two, let me say two. The first one is that the way we are today running the research program in the Commission is much more too fragmented. We discussed transport research, which in itself was not a particularly broad part of the framework program, divided by 2 DGs. And of course, they were consistently programmed, but separately. And I don't think I was particularly impressed with what we could achieve in that setup, and I still see it in this way. And when I arrived in DG RTD with Carlos 2 months ago, I found an extremely ambitious approach set up by the Commissioner with the support of Robert Jan and Kurt Vandenberg, which is a joined-up approach to FP9. You will find out, I mean, you've seen that from the drafts which are circulating everywhere. You all have them. The only thing which you don't have is the budget distribution, I think. Yeah,
yeah, well, we've been trying to get that.
Which you won't get until Carlos presents it on Thursday.
If you tell us, we won't tell anybody.
Yeah, I'm sure. This is Chatham House here, isn't it? But the construction of the proposal is widely available, and I mean, to an extent. That is also, there's an element of co-creation, I think, in the preparation of Horizon Europe with that. And you will have seen from the approach which we have chosen is that we have a much more transdisciplinary and much more joined-up approach. And you will tomorrow in Horizon Europe not have any more 10 Commission departments and 10 directorates in DG RTD preparing their part of the framework program. This will be only one joined-up governance setup, where there will, of course, be a lot of space also for policies to impact on the research agenda, but also the research agenda to shape policies, and we will do it in a joined-up way. And I must say that my experience from transport really pushes me to move towards this approach where you work across intervention areas, not just with one department or one unit, but across several in the Commission.
But how is this different than inter-service consultation?
Completely different, has nothing to do with it. Inter-service consultation, traditionally in any organization, is a lead service speaking to its stakeholders. If that lead service is properly embedded in the organization in terms of quality, it goes a bit beyond that very vertical approach, but in most cases by construction, that's how it is. And then the text is available and is then put to comments to the others. That's what inter-service consultation is. And so it starts from from a basis which is already very mature, very advanced. And so what colleagues then across other departments can do is, of course, ensure that what is put to them does not undermine their own policy work, so that's very important.
Damage control.
They can sometimes also add to it and improve it, and that, of course, also happens very regularly. But the overall direction and architecture is there. And you don't, in most cases, unless it doesn't make sense, and that would not appear so late in the process, is very difficult. The way we hope to deliver Horizon Europe, and the way this Commission has started to work already now, and indeed my experience as Deputy Secretary was a very hands-on experience from that point of view, was that across project teams where you had a vice president, several commissioners, several services, coming into a discussion at the very, very first stage, ahead of any analytical work, ahead of any drafting of a proposal, ensured that the various dimensions of different policy areas were considered from the outset, and that the construction of the initiative takes this into account from day one. In the most advanced case, you would even have teams drafting it together across Commission departments. We've had that on a number of files. I mean, the clean energy package, which had also a big innovation part, is a good example of that. It was led through DGNR, but also with the involvement of 4 or 5 other departments.
That's how you got to know Moidash as well.
I worked with Carlos and Antonio in particular. And Patrick Child already, who was already then in DG RTD. We prepared the innovation component of the package, and this was really developed across portfolios, across transport, across climate, across environment, with, of course, a strong anchor in DG Energy, but not done only in DG Energy. And that's what we hope to do also with Horizon.
So the strategic planning, then is it like a council, or there? If any time Horizon Europe goes near health research, there's going to be like a committee that's formed of directors from Santé, from...
I mean, it's well, I mean, the way where we are today, and of course, we have clearly set out the way we want to do it, and this is certainly also available in discussions with you. We will need to progressively implement it, but the idea is that you have these 5 clusters. You're aware of these clusters, which I think are relatively straightforward clusters in continuity with Horizon 2020. But already each of these clusters is constructed slightly differently and has this cross-disciplinary or cross-silo approach. And under these 5 clusters, you must have seen that there are about 30 intervention areas. And these 30 intervention areas, with 1 or 2 exceptions, are all cross-departmental in terms of content. And of course, they're also cross research institutes, cross departments in national administration. Is going to be very challenging. The intervention areas under the clusters are one of the main novelties, and I would say one of the main improvements of the Horizon Europe proposal. And the way we will deal with that in the Commission will, I think, probably also need, by and large, and depending on circumstances, also need to be reflected outside with you, with industry and national administrations and politicians. And it is looking at these intervention areas in a joined-up way. So the idea would be that you will have a dedicated group of colleagues from across DG RTD and the Commission, which will, and as I tell them what I want, I don't want the first draft. I don't want the first draft from, in transport, Clara de la Torre. I don't want the first draft in transport from his counterpart, Harold Reuters. I want their 2 teams, with the teams in energy, environment, climate, probably someone from DG Grow, I suppose certainly someone from DG Connect as well, to prepare the basis, the analytical basis. So where do we stand with research? What is the views of stakeholders? What are we delivering in terms of projects across our research executive agencies today? So that analytical basis will be the starting point, but then I lock them up in a room, kind of an open space type of room with computers, chairs,
with bad
food,
commission coffee.
Food.
Yeah.
And after a week they come out with a program. So I mean, this is figurative, but that's what they all ask me. Who holds the pen? I'm not holding the pen, that's for sure. And I don't think anyone in this room will be the one holding the pen. I think the challenge is co-creation. It's done in industry, it's done in the private sector, it's also done in some public administration in the EU. It is certainly challenging in the sense that each of our colleagues in this room will have to carry with him, of course, the expectations from his group, his stakeholders, his colleagues in his department, in his DG or directorate. He brings that with him. That's his baggage, and that's very good. But then in the meeting itself, of course, you will need to go beyond it and have a process which allows all these dimensions to come together. And here, the real challenge for me is that today we often have relatively long list of topics which in part reflect the diversity. And so the challenge is that in this room, to get out of the room and be freed at the end of the week, there's a risk that they don't make just a very longer list. And we will need to ensure that we don't do that.
So does that mean that then the program committees, this is terrible Brussels speak going on here, but you know,
I'm answering questions.
Yeah, but the program committees and that kind of elaborate structure of member state consultation, does that continue or not?
That will need to be adjusted. There's no doubt about that.
It will need to be adjusted.
Yeah, because I think the normal traditional sector committee will have to look at drafts which go beyond the very vertical traditional basis. Yes.
So maybe the program committees need to be also more heterogeneous.
I would expect that this will develop as well.
Okay. And last question on this: then who spends the money?
Who spends the money? The implementation of the work programs will, in all likelihood, it's not formally in the proposal. That's why I nuance it here in public. But the intention is to use the extremely powerful setup of executive agencies, and they will have a central role in helping us prepare call for proposals and running them.
There's 10 billion in Horizon Europe, according to the MFF announcement, for agriculture.
Yeah.
Who's issuing the call? Is it the is it the DG of Agriculture or DG Research?
It will be a joined-up work program process where DG Agri will, of course, have quite a massive technical and policy contribution to make, but they will do it together with us. But they will no doubt also be working with Klima, Environment, Santé, DG Just for the consumers. This will be a much broader operation.
So will this go through the Research Executive Agency then?
And then the implementation of a traditional call, the collaborative calls, yes, that would continue to be implemented in, at least as I speak today, as said, in the formal proposal which you will see, and that's the case for all MFF programs. I don't think Günther went into that today. No. But we've been very careful not to anticipate the future setup. So we have not gone into this detail, but we've set up very, very efficient agencies, and they would, in all logic, be the basis for looking at it in the future. I mean, obviously, there are a number of other instruments. I don't know if we'll go through the framework program. Future proposal, EIC, ERC, partnerships is not only collaborative research, but as far as collaborative research programmed in a joined-up way, yes, that's how it would work.
Okay, so you want, one of the things you want to change and make your mark when I ask you who you are is this issue of cooperation and synergy and etc.
That's I mean that's not a personal endeavor particularly. That is the way this commission is trying to improve the delivery of public policies. And that's what I've been doing indeed over the last 3 years. But that's also indeed what I've been doing over the last 25 years. I was most of the time in positions where I was not only looking at one part of a portfolio, but also in most cases at a broader set, either of instruments or areas. And so I'm quite used to it. And I think that's indeed an efficient way of working.
Okay, all right. One other question before I bring up our fellow panelists, and that is, Oettinger this morning was talking about the budget and the need for it and his hopes for it and the speedy action for it, etc. But come on, 97.6 billion for Horizon Europe, 2.4. I mean, these are big numbers.
Yeah, they are.
How credible is this?
I think, I mean, firstly, the proposal itself, I mean, the headline figure of 100 billion, of course, with Euratom research and also what will be implemented thanks to InvestEU, is a significant amount of funding, but it is based on, as you know, an extremely solid analysis on the one hand of needs, but also is linked on expectations from member states. If you look across positions taken by member states in the MFF preparation, research and innovation, whatever angle it was, has always been promoted by member states. So we have, I think, a very strong political starting point and a very strong and justifiable need. Secondly, I think research and the framework program in particular, of course, also has the very obvious benefit of both a track record and an extremely strong stakeholder community. And both will help us, no doubt, in the discussions, which are going to be a difficult discussion on stakeholders. I would, if I just take the discussions of the last MFF or the one in 2014 when the investment plan, the Juncker plan, was set up, the stakeholder community is very vocal and is listened to, which is more important. So this is one aspect, and then the track record is speaking to an extent for itself. If I look at today's partnerships, if I look at the science and the excellence of science driven by the European Research Council, if I look at the alumni of Marie Sklodowska-Curie grantees, I mean, this is a track record which is nearly unmatched across EU programs. And I think this is something which will certainly have impact also in the MFF negotiations. I mean, Günther Oettinger said it to you this morning. It's going to be an extremely difficult negotiation because the Commission has been extremely ambitious, realistic to ensure that we have a basis for a fast negotiation, but ambitious as well at 1.11% of GDP with 27 member states, and has nevertheless managed to prioritize programs with a track record of high EU added value, such as research, but it's not the only one. Education and Erasmus are another example, and came forward with high EU added value new priorities. So now the question is going to be indeed where will member states find the balance with structural funds and agriculture, which have been reduced, and with these new priorities. And I think one parameter which should not be forgotten is that indeed the size of the budget is very significantly increased, which means that of course national contributions also will be increased. And so this is also a parameter not to be forgotten. So what we will do on the side of the Commission, and that goes for the entire MFF proposal, not for Horizon Europe particularly, is that we will continue to make the case for each component of the proposal. But maybe as useful and as important, we will also make the case that they all fit together. And that's what member states need to look at, and finance ministers, is also the articulation between Horizon Europe and InvestEU and the Digital Europe program and structural funds and InvestEU, and that it's across this diversity with the ambition in each component that we can deliver an agenda for Europe's future, which is very much growth employment related, but which in the case of Horizon Europe, of course, goes also beyond. Okay. There's a very strong case to be made, so let's see how that goes, but you will play, of course, an important role here.
Okay, all right. Could I be joined, please, by our two other panelists, please? Come up. Isabelle Tison de Gaulle. She is Vice President for European Strategic Initiatives and Scientific Relations at Sanofi. Patrick, why don't you go over here?
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. And Patrick Prendergast, Provost and President of Trinity College Dublin. Thank you for joining us. Let's... Thank you. Yeah, a clean glass, I think, is needed. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is thirsty work, you know, really. Let's continue this discussion about synergies for the moment and how the different pieces of the program fit together. First of all, just from what you've heard, is this make sense? Can it work? Who wants to go first?
I can start. And yes,
does the emperor have clothes?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense for various reasons. I think, as you mentioned it, the co-creation part is important. If we look at today in our industry, I'm coming from the healthcare industry, pharma industry. Innovation is one of the key pillars for growth. It's highly important. We can't do it alone. Diseases itself, science, we can't know everything for this. And in addition to that, there is the explosion of technology today, transversal technologies, that need to be incorporated. And as I mentioned it, we cannot do it alone. So co-construction is key. We cannot just ask to somebody to do something without making sure that he has incorporated every knowledge that he could have, and thus working with different kind of innovators or different kind of innovation. So this notion of co-creation, networks that we need to build, or clusters, but clusters here as ecosystems, are highly important so that people could interact all together and have also a good visibility of what could they have in terms of tools that can help themselves to this co-creation. So all that you have said for us are highly important and to try to avoid silos among discipline or silos among the different tools.
Patrick.
Well, synergy is certainly a great word to use. I'm kind of convinced from what I've listened to there that there's some degree of synergy between the various parts of the Commission in the various different departments. The greater task and challenge, of course, is synergy more broadly in Europe as well between what's happening nationally and what's happening in the European Commission. I'm not so convinced of that. And Ireland's case is quite interesting because we used a lot of our structural funds when we used to get those in large quantities, to build our universities, to build institutes of technology, and to build talent. And the national narrative in Ireland is that we spend far more of our money on this sort of thing than other countries in Europe when they got structural funds, and that this has paid off in the creation of talent. And that it has created thereby the ability to synergize with the European framework programs and benefit from them. As the president of a university, I'm looking for additional other synergies as well, of course. We have to build capacity to be able to, within our university, to benefit from these programs. The European Investment Bank is a real crucial one for us to get the finances, working together with philanthropy to build the infrastructure to benefit from these programs, and that's a very important synergy. Probably I should also mention that I'm on the board of the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, and this, to my mind, is something rather unusual in Europe, because we've done something with the European Institute of Innovation and Technology that nobody else has done. I mean, ERC is great, and someone mentioned earlier that we university presidents, when we meet each other, say, "Oh, how many ERCs do you have?" And that is true. This does happen. It's a very important measure of. I think that was Herman. Even in the University of Cambridge, they do that, and so. And for what it's worth, we get half of the European Research Council grants that come into Ireland to come to Trinity College Dublin, and we're very proud of that. We've still to catch up on Cambridge, though. But so this is good. A top quality, highly excellent PI award grant system. But the European Institute of Innovation and Technology tries to kickstart whole new ecosystems around topics. Yeah. This is highly ambitious and something that I don't think anyone else in the world has tried to do. And it's a great thing that we're doing. And it would be wonderful to see more talk of how to synergize with that. And I think it would be very interesting, too, to have a conversation between the EIT and the EIC. I can say, as someone on the EIT board, that conversation hasn't happened yet. And it would be a very important one to have happen in the future, because the EIT is actually driving forward, walking the walk, if you like, with regard to innovation, driving out new spin-out companies and so on across Europe in these target areas. So in answer to the question about synergy, absolutely, I believe it's happening. Within the Commission, but there is a lot more opportunities there in the sort of in the rich ecosystem of various different units there are around Europe, both nationally and within, and driven by the European Commission to find synergies.
Patrick, is there, if you go again on the member states, just look at Dublin for the moment, is there any possibility of synergy happening among the ministries there?
Ah, well, now, there's a question that demands a political answer. I think they actually, our ministries in Dublin and the Irish government get on quite well amongst each other. I don't see that as a main issue. Although, between education on the one hand and what we call business enterprise and innovation on the other, there probably could be more. But this is a thing paralleled, I think, in many national ministries and governments around Europe. This false block there is between education on the one hand and research on the other, which of course is entirely artificial. And in universities, the two things must happen together. And great value derives in universities by doing the research and the education mission in the same place at the same time, typically by the same people. And that's something that we would like to see more of.
Okay. Jean-Henri, go ahead, Isabelle.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one point. There is a synergism, but also the continuity. Because I think this is important that when we are talking about ERC or for pharma IMI, EIT, EICs and after, that in a certain way there is a continuity among all of this, so that in fact you cannot stop an innovation somewhere because she is stuck in and we have not pushed enough for this. So of course this is not just from the beginning to the end, but we should see how we do not have gaps somewhere where an innovation is stuck somewhere, coming from one place to another up to the end of the scale-up.
Go ahead.
I have like 25 things I would want to say now, but I will try to limit myself to 2 or 3. I mean, on health, maybe just indeed, clearly, I mean, health research cannot be disconnected from public health policies. Yeah. That makes no sense. And I think also for reasons of treaty competences, this is sometimes not always to articulate in terms of the complementarity between national policies and implementation and what we complement at EU level. But clearly the approach of Horizon Europe, including the one around missions, is also aimed at adding to the toolbox across the entire spectrum, including, I mean, from early research down to regulations and public policy implementation. And health is, from that point of view, I think, particularly a particularly vivid example. In health, there's another illustration also of my joined-up approach, where I hope we can continue to improve with Horizon Europe. If you take health and digital and artificial intelligence, this is going to be, is already an exploding topic and a major potential, both in terms of research and in terms of better health outcomes and delivery. And what I observe is that if you want, the hardware is done by my colleagues in DG Connect, and the software is done by my colleagues in DG RTD. I mean, I don't think personally that this is the most effective way of doing it. In Horizon Europe, I mean, it's consistent, obviously, yeah? But in Horizon Europe, this would be built up jointly across an intervention area, which would cover both health and the digital dimension of health, and I hope that can help. On member states, I mean, this is an extraordinarily important topic, which is way beyond Horizon Europe. I think Horizon Europe has many instruments and many forms, supports many forms of partnership, where in most cases member states are part of. So it's a very, very important contribution. But the real discussion is how member states can collectively, with the support of EU institutions, develop their national research and innovation systems, and how we can not just exchange best practices, but help research ministers, industry ministers, make the case to invest in institutions, to invest in research, to invest in universities, with their finance minister. And that's a real discussion, frankly, at national level. So I think there's a lot more which I think member states could do together and with us, notably around the European research area. But it's a different topic, not for today. Now on the European innovation, the EIT, the EIT, the European Institute for Technology, and also in connection with your comment on the continuum of innovation, I mean, the EIT has not really yet engaged with the EIC because the EIC doesn't exist. But your comment is a very, very correct one in the sense that there's a lot of legitimate questioning on how the two will articulate. And that was honestly 2 months ago when I started one of my questions. I mean, do we have the EIT? So how does the EIC complement the existing EIT? Yeah? The EIT exists. I think the answer is in the notion that the EIC should be the place where we do three things. Firstly, we propose a platform to allow the interconnection of the innovation ecosystems, the ones created by the EIT, the ones created by national schemes and regional schemes. They are in most, not all, but in most member states. And they operate in isolation from one another and from EU instruments in many cases. To connect, of course, innovation through other programs, particularly Horizon Europe, the proof of concept, for example, in the ERC, or the outcome of collaborative research, or the work in universities supported by the European structural funds. All this has developed very diverse and sometimes unique innovation ecosystems which are not interconnected. So that would bring a lot of added value, and the knowledge and innovation communities of the EIT would be centerpiece in that. Secondly, the EIC will of course continue to do what it does rather well today, which is largely support to innovative SMEs. That's the Pathfinder. And what it will add, which is unique and does not exist today, is very substantial support to deep tech innovators, those which are still at the SME or sometimes even at the startup stage, but which still need not just to grow up commercially, but which need to continue to invest into costly research, which by definition is highly risky research. And that is not available today in most member states, if not all member states, and not either at EU level, combined with the capacity to already articulate this grant funding with financial instruments, so that the company can do its research, and as the research progresses and matures, then the scaling up can also be done through investments across other EU instruments or simply on capital markets or with bank lending. And this to support deep tech, disruptive innovation, which is by essence, of course, also highly risky innovation. That's maybe another subject. So this is the construction, if you want. This is what Carlos Moedas has been promoting over the last year and a half or 2 years, which was for the first time discussed by leaders. They discussed it when they met mid-May in Sofia. The dinner debate was on disruptive innovation and digital. And leaders have concurred in this informal discussion that will now come back to the European Council on the high need that at EU level, in complement to what they do nationally, we have the capacity to support that disruptive innovation. There was a Macron-Merkel paper at the summit, and a Finnish paper as well, and this communication from the Commission. So the EIC was discussed by leaders, and that I think bodes well, by the way, also for Horizon Europe. And the EIC is now part of the Commission proposal, so we're getting there.
Okay, but this relationship between the EIT and the EIC,
yeah.
As I listen to you, it sounds a little bit like the connection could also be like a feeder.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes, including as a feeder. Oh. I mean, the startups and innovators which are nurtured in the knowledge and innovation communities, these companies, the EIT does not have the instruments to scale them up.
Okay, but
it's not available.
To make that really work well, I mean, like there's a health kick and there's different things. Yeah. Come back to the health example, but then, so which commissioner controls the EIT?
I don't think a commissioner controls the EIT. Well, there's a commissioner responsible for the EIT, which is Tibor Navracsics.
I know. I'm asking. In the next commission, should the portfolios be shuffled?
We'll see that. I mean, it works.
We just heard from Commissioner Oettinger this morning that there should be no reduction in the number of commissioners.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, to reduce the number of, the European Council will have to decide what it does under the treaty, whether it confirmed, because I don't know if you know, but the 28 commissioners of today is a derogation to the treaty. We should already be 15 commissioners, but the European Council can decide, and so far decided each time to keep the 28. And Günther seems to anticipate, and he's a politician, I'm not, that it's not unlikely, yes.
Maybe one thing important on the EIT to highlight is the triangle, if I may say like that, between training, skills, talent. I put all of this in one bucket, innovation and business creation, within a network which try to really tackle the three components. And I think this is quite important here to keep that, so that then the scale-up can, innovation can come and scale-up can appear and be taken by EIC in a certain way, or scale up by the EIC. So I think this triangle is something unique.
I agree.
And that maybe in some other, you can find something in other tools, but that really capture, and going back to what you said, it's highly important not to co-create. It's highly important to really create the synergism. Yeah. And this was also what
the IT, by the way, the IT is this time around really embedded in Horizon Europe, which was not the case before. It was anchored in Horizon Europe, but it was not embedded.
In Pillar 2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, it will be it will be a combination. But what I find important is that indeed the work done in the knowledge and innovation communities will be part of the global challenges discussion of Horizon Europe, and that I think because it's so valuable. And just to say on skills in particular, and Mr. Prendergast, also from my conversation with the Irish Research Council, which I met recently, and they came with one of their grantees. We had a very interesting discussion. And what came from this discussion is that this young entrepreneur, his problem was not the risk, his problem was not the funding or the financing. He had all of that. The problem was to find the people. He didn't find the people skilled to do it. And he was, of course, finding them across Europe, but this was a real challenge. Maybe it was specific for his sector and Ireland, but It's one which I see in other parts of Europe, and which is where the skills dimension, I think, is absolutely critical as well.
You'd almost think that we planned it, because this comes into my next thing about synergy, which is about the European university networks. Those of us that are presidents of European universities now are phoning each other much more regularly than we ever have, because this idea of the European university networks and that might have some, even future Erasmus might be coordinated around European university networks, or indeed in part of Horizon Europe they might play a role.
Yeah.
This is an interesting concept, because it could drive that talent agenda that you quite rightly put your finger on there for European entrepreneurship. It'd be very interesting to see how that concept, whether it was just a random idea from the French president that sort of came to the fore, or whether it's part of a longer strategy of integrating education and research and development.
I mean, it's part. It came indeed from Emmanuel Macron's Sorbonne speech, if I remember well. But it was then discussed by leaders in Gothenburg in October or November. It's part of Council conclusions, and it's also part of the Erasmus proposal. So we are now taking it up and trying to make it operational. This is very largely led by Tibor Navracic and DG EAC, but clearly in the concept of the university concept, I think in most, maybe all member states now, I'm not completely sure, education comes together with research. They feed each other. And we are aware of that, and Horizon Europe has the proper formal links with Erasmus, but we still need to invent how we do it. Because under research, traditionally, over all these framework programs, we have been able to help you connect your research capacities across EU universities. And so we need to, and I must say I'm very interested and available to continue this discussion. I was with the Guild this morning. I don't know if you know the Guild, which is also which is another group of universities. Very interesting conversation. And we landed on that at the end. And what I said is that I would be particularly interested to sit down with my counterpart, Tim is the Director General in DG EAC and university, so the two of us and you, and discuss how we make this a reality and how the two programs can support this political vision.
Okay, so we've talked about synergy. Before I will come to you for some questions as well, if I may. But let me ask you, each of you, is there an aspect of Horizon 2020 you think doesn't work, besides synergy, that
today
didn't work today, that you think should be improved in Horizon Europe? I mean, so what you could say what was good about Horizon 20, but no, let's talk about what was wrong that can be improved beyond synergies.
Okay, well, let's say there's lots of good stuff, but so if I
we'll take that as read.
We'll take that as read. I think that the success rates really indicates, I suppose, the quality of European research consortia and the ability to make great proposals. But when you hear of people, for example, under the Marie Sklodowska-Curie program getting for their networks 98.5% and then not getting funded, these are, you wonder what's happening here with the success rates. And of course, you're a victim of your own success because people want to apply, but these are outside the norms of success rates in most international programs. So I think if there was one thing that really Mr. Paquet and his colleagues need to think about is this.
Okay, success rates. And Isabelle?
I would say maybe putting a certain degree of strategic guidance in what we do, but still promoting the top-down and of course the inverse approaches. So a good balance between so top-down and bottom-up. To having this, and I will take the example of IMI, where with the IMI 2 we have changed the governance so that to give a little bit more of strategic guidance of what all the partners wanted to do before then after launching the call, so that the call is really top to where the issue are and the barrier are, specifically of course for here the industry needs, so that the innovation then to tackle those barriers can really be up to the point to be really worked out and lead to innovation. So a certain degree of strategic guidance, but not too many. So this is a very, very thin here point.
So the balance was wrong.
So really a good balance, but with some strategic guidance for industry to tackle some barriers.
Yeah, I mean, two very good points. On the success rate, I mean, the budget increase will address it to an extent, but to a limited extent. That's very clear. And to an extent also, the increasing budget will maybe call for more proposals. So it's not at all straightforward that this can really change the arithmetics of the oversubscription. I think it has also one dimension which I think we should not shy away from noting, which is that a degree of the oversubscription is also due to the fact that in many member states programs are not dismantled but reduced, and applicants are pushed to the European program. And I think there's a real responsibility also that we look collectively across all national schemes to ensure that there's enough support for research generally, and that then the EU research can really focus on what brings researchers together and where the competition at EU level generates this excellence. Now on the solutions to the problem, because this is not going to happen overnight, I suppose there is no quick fix. We would have found it with you already. I mean, there are modalities of two-step evaluations, which I think are of interest to many. I saw a briefing from the Court of Auditors when I arrived 2 months ago, and they will have a report now soon, which is based also on the survey of you and many others in Europe on how they see Horizon 2020. And many were recommending that we look indeed at 2 or maybe sometimes even 3-step approaches, so that you can filter progressively, and that the effort you need to put, because the issue is not the rejection rate, the issue is the effort you need to put into it and being rejected, I think. And therefore we need to look into that. In part, it may be one element of the solution is maybe in part also with your comment on more strategic programming and a bit more space for innovative solutions, so less prescriptive calls. Because indeed, I think one of the traditions is to be rather very detailed on what we expect across all instruments of the framework program, and we need to look into that. And so that's one well-identified evolution of Horizon Europe, to open up the evaluation modalities. So not to lose the obvious merit of the peer review evaluation which we have today, which not only ensures scientific excellence, but also protects the Commission in implementing the choices. So that's very well understood, but create maybe a bit more space in this process for interviews. We have tested that just now with the SME instrument. We had interviews, not just proposals. And that has shown one thing which you all know very well, is that many of our proposals are prepared, in fact, by consultants. So when the consultants support the investigator or the innovator, that's not a problem. But when the consultant substitutes itself, it shows in the interview, and that doesn't help, I can tell you. But okay, that's you, Mr. Hoyer. Yes, and that doesn't help, frankly. So maybe here we can improve things a little bit. But then beyond that, there is also some discussion on the completely bottom-up processes. That's for the EIC in particular, where we would probably also need to have a slightly more strategic also evaluation processes to deal with that. So we will look into that into Horizon Europe. But your question, Richard, is also for me a good opportunity to say that, of course, now I'm arriving and helping Carlos to shape its proposal, a very ambitious one, and in terms of quality one, I think we will be proud of. But in fact, all this is for 2021 and beyond. So I'm as interested to see the delivery here and now. What matters, I think, for Europe is the science which is developed in project today in 2019 and 2020. And so the adjustments which we should look into can also in large cases happen today.
So you're looking now in the doing this in the current work program?
If we will certainly also be looking at that, yes. Whether we can fix it all, I don't know. But
strategic planning aspect also?
Yeah, strategic planning to an extent as well. I mean, here, on the one hand, when leaders discussed the European Innovation Council and disruptive innovation, several of them called for a pilot on disruptive innovation. So we are seeing in how far the Horizon 2020 legal basis has space for that, and that would be very strategic by definition. In terms of the 1, 2, or 3-step proposals, that's something which can be done today. It's being tested today already, as are lump sums, for example. Another way also to simplify the evaluation process and the cost of submitting proposals. How long? We're finishing now, aren't we?
Yeah.
So then I need to let off one last message. Can I do that?
Yes.
Thank you, which is strategic programming. And strategic programming now of Horizon Europe. So the proposal will be available on Thursday. You will certainly look into it. You will certainly also speak with your national administrations, with members of parliament, and you will try to impress on all of us needed changes from your point of view, and no doubt the proposal will develop and improve. And that will take a number of months. You heard the Commissioner this morning. We all hope to be able to do a lot of progress with the Austrian presidency and Romanian presidency. Let's see where we are in spring of next year. But next to that, what Carlos Moedas also wants to do is to start a process of strategic programming in parallel to the negotiation with at least two purposes. The first one, of course, to be ready in 21. And I must say, already after 8 weeks, I realize that the entire machinery is quite substantial, and you don't move in a matter of weeks. You need a bit of time. But more than that, the idea is also, with Madame Matsukato, who is just arriving, hello, is also to continue to discuss, including with all of you, what the missions should be. The idea of these missions under Horizon Europe. The proposal will have the framework, the proposal will have the criteria, the proposal will not have missions. So we will not say which missions should take place. We want to do that in discussion with politicians in member states, with members of the parliament, but we also need to engage scientists, stakeholders, industry and citizens. And that is not an easy proposition, and the process needs to be invented. And there's going to be, therefore, a strategic discussion on co-creating a limited number of missions to begin Horizon Europe. So that's one very specific feature of this programming process. Another one is partnerships. As you are aware, we want to streamline partnerships. We will not propose any specifics in FP9 on what will happen with existing partnerships. So we will want to discuss, again, in a very broad sense, how these partnerships can and should develop. And beyond that, this process of strategic programming will also help us with you to try to put some flesh on this concept of transdisciplinary research, to discuss with you what these intervention areas could deliver. And with all that work, we will inform also the interinstitutional negotiations, help the Parliament, help the Council to come to a swift agreement on the legal proposal, and maybe also avoid that too many details of drafting end up in the legal proposal, because I'm really adamant that I will convince, I hope to convince all of you that we keep a bit of flexibility, because trying today in 2018 and 19 to set out what we will need in terms of research in 25 or 26 strikes me as being a bit difficult. So all these aspects are part of that strategic programming, which is a political process, but which is also a process of co-creation. I can't tell you today because we are still working on it, and the same teams are still struggling until Thursday to get the proposal right. But as of Friday morning, they will be on preparing that strategic programming. So we will come back to all of you immediately after the summer to engage you on that.
What's left to decide in the next 2 days?
Most of it, I think, is ready. Commissioners will discuss it tomorrow. We are Tuesday, yeah, tomorrow morning. I mean, I think as I said, the only point which is, I mean, there's some drafting which is still being improved and adjusted, but we are essentially where you are with the leaked documents, I think. It's the distribution of the budget.
Small detail.
Which
yeah,
is
okay, all right, okay.
not an entirely negligible detail, but that is not for today.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much to you and to Patrick and Isabel also. Well, look, why don't we, we're running late. Why don't we take a 20-minute coffee break? Be back here. Oh, hold on, what? What? Okay, 15. And let's be back here. Among the other things, we will have Christian Ehler, who is one of the rapporteurs on this legislation. Thank you.